we are. Today we are going to do a little video. Hopefully it won't take too long because I want to keep it concise so you guys can understand what's going on. We're going to do an image transfer directly on wood. So for those of you who are brand new to mixed media, this is something that we are going to expand on and expand on and expand on for weeks and months and well, I guess let's say weeks to come, because this technique can be used in encaustic and in mixed media and in acrylic painting and in all sorts of painting. So here I have two little 6x6s that have an image transferred on the white background. So I wanted to start with this so you'd get a visual idea of what a transfer is. Now we're going to dive right into how to do it. So I took a photocopy. It's a laser photocopy. Now laser works best if you have lots of dry time. Okay, so what I'm going to explain about that is that I have a image here that I can show you that was done using inkjet. So a lot of people think that inkjet doesn't work because of the dry time, or sorry, because of the water soluble ink. That is true only if you don't let the ink or the glue fully dry. So for this purpose, I am using a laser-based copy. However, if you only have inkjet available, you'll just want it to dry extremely well. Okay, so I'm going to start with my laser-based copy, and I made the copy to fit the size of my board. So the reason for that is because, and then, oh, here it is, wrong one. The reason for that is because you can see that my image cuts off, right? So I printed a smaller one here to show you what would happen if I were to use an image that's smaller than my board. If I were to put this on my board, somebody's face is getting cut off no matter which way I slice it, right? So it looks kind of strange if you're trying to make something look like a complete sort of magnified, blown up image if you've cut something off. So that's kind of a telltale sign that you haven't exactly done your due diligence of making your photocopy to fit the size of the board. So that's what I always recommend, is that I take an image and I make it the same width at least as the board. Now if you are working with a smaller image than your actual board, like this one, right? It doesn't matter because I have lots of space around it. So this one I didn't need it to be scaled, and I did it over two boards. You can see I've got these two boards glued together. And the reason I did it over two boards is because this is part of a greater project that will be disclosed next week. So anyway, so that's why that one was done that way. But a paper or an image scaled to size would mean that if your image is going to get cut off, it's best if it actually just sort of overlaps or fits your board. So diving right in, this is a wood panel, and this is a very lightweight wood panel. So I'm also going to talk more about this for our greater project ahead. I just got these in store, and we had them made because they're very, very lightweight, because we're going to be joining them together later. Again, more on that, but this is just a wood panel, so you could transfer pretty much onto anything. Canvas works, however, it's very difficult to remove the paper because it's pliable. So I like to use wood because of the rough surface, or sorry, not the rough surface, the rigidity of the surface. Now the very first thing I want you to do is to take your photocopy and flip it over, and on the back with a pencil, write no. Okay, so this is a little trick that I always do when I'm teaching, because I've had so many people in image transfers sort of instinctively put the glue on the wrong side. So we're going to write no on the back, which is going to say no glue. Okay, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull out our adhesive. So I like to use a matte adhesive, and my favorite is the matte Mod Podge. So the matte Mod Podge works really well as an image transfer medium. There are lots of image transfer mediums work, but the one thing that does not work that I consistently use as a glue is wallpaper paste. So you don't want anything that can reactivate. So wallpaper paste is designed to reactivate. The matte Mod Podge dries really quickly, and it doesn't have any glossiness to it, and it just seems to work really well. You can buy other mediums, matte mediums, things like that. This is probably the most versatile product, so I tend to use it a lot. The next thing we're going to do is apply Mod Podge exactly to our image, like to the front of our image, and I'm going to walk you through that process, and we're going to apply it to the wood. So your wood can be pre-painted or pre-decorated or pre-designed, or if you want to do an underpainting, you absolutely could. This one was just painted white, just so that for visual sake you guys would be able to see what was going on. But I'm going to do it directly on the wood because I want to change the warmth of the image. So you can see, because this was a very snowy day, and I think it's a great picture, but I just feel like it could use a little warming up, and then I also feel like the background could be recessed a little bit. So that's what we're going to talk about in this quick little transfer video. So the first thing we want to do is take our Mod Podge with a smooth brush and apply it to the face of the image. So the entire image needs to have glue all over the surface, because what you're actually doing is you're sealing in the ink. So the glue, your adhesive, is actually binding with just the ink, and it's going to pick up that ink, and then that's what's going to be the transfer medium onto our board. So I make sure I have a nice even coat. I don't want it too thick, but I don't want it spotty or patchy. If you miss any spots, then you will actually have an imperfect transfer, because that won't transfer. Okay, there we go. So I've applied my Mod Podge to the face, and then I'm going to apply a very even and consistent coat to the face of my wood. So it's the same process. You just want to make sure that you have a good, even coat. What you are not concerned about is, at this point, is about getting too much glue on here, because you can squeegee it out. The only thing about having too much glue is that it's wasteful. So try to put on a thick enough coat that when you squeegee it, you're not going to lose too much out the sides, but at the same time you have a nice even coat. So now, when you flip over your piece of paper, it should say no on the back, right? That is to remind you that you have no glue on this surface. If you've glued the surface, you can stop and start over, because this won't work if you've put glue on the back of your image. So by instinct, everyone tends to, I'm just going to line this up. By instinct, everyone tends to, or people tend to just put glue on the back, because in our brains, we're collaging all the time. So if you've done that, you have to start over, unfortunately. So your board is still good, but your image is no longer good if you're doing a transfer. If you're just doing a collage, carry on, that's fine. But I'm teaching a little transfer project today, which is a sneak peek to my greater project that is being introduced next week for the summer, and indefinitely after that. So if you have no time this summer, don't worry, you still have access indefinitely to this project. So now what I'm doing, you've noticed, is I have this little reward card, which is great because it's flexible. So I don't use anything metal or anything too thin. I just like a nice plastic level surface for pushing out any excess glue and really making contact with that glue to the board. So glue to glue, you want to have really great contact without having any glue on the back. So again, instinctively, sometimes people tend to put glue, and I'm just doing this pretend, put glue on the back of their paper. That's why you have the word no there. No glue, no glue, no glue. Okay? So your card is the only thing that is going to make contact with this. So here's the dealio about dry time. Before I do that, I'm going to do one little thing. If you flip it over and you've noticed that you have a lot of glue coming out the back, just use a paper towel or a baby wipe and clean up any excess glue that may be stuck to the back or dripping down the sides, because we just don't want glue dripping down the sides. It's hard to remove when it's dry. So this needs to dry ideally in the sun for about 15 minutes. Like honestly, that's great if you can get it to dry in the sun. If you're working on a damp day or something like that, you can try to speed it up a little bit with a hair dryer and get it to warm up and that sort of thing. And you can push the dry time. What you don't want to do is you don't want to remove this image until the glue is completely 100% dry. So the reason for that is that your image won't transfer unless the glue is dry, because all we're actually doing is we're pressing that little bit of ink that was on the paper into the glue, and then that glue is just sitting on the surface of the board. So once we remove this paper, you're going to see that we're not going to have a very good contact if we go and peel it off right now and it hasn't had a chance to dry. So in the sunshine, ideally give it 15-20 minutes. That's the best. Hair dryer or otherwise, let it speed up, let it take some time, but you will want to wait. If you're using an inkjet, I had this in the sun for about an hour. So how do you know when something is dry? When I feel this one here, it feels cool and damp because of the moisture, right? So when I feel this, it just feels like it doesn't feel wet, it feels cool and damp. So that means it's not dry. So for the magic of this video, I went ahead and did another one, which I had outside for about a half an hour in the sun. And now it feels just like this one did that I did weeks ago. It feels the exact same. So how does that feel? It feels like room temperature. It's warm a little bit because it was out in the sun, but it's 100% dry. This one feels cool and damp, so I wouldn't go ahead and do that until it is dry. So for those of you who are working alongside this project, now would be a good time to go put it in the sun, go put your painting in the sun, and then just come back and watch the little video on how to remove this. Or you can dry it up with your hair dryer and then catch up later on onto the video. All right, so here we go. I'm going to now remove this. So I could peel this off, but it wouldn't actually do any good because it is now, this paper is now glued face down to my image. So I am using regular tap water in a spray bottle, and I am really soaking the surface. So this is, as you can see, my image has gone translucent, right? Because what I did was I soaked the paper. If I had sealed that with glue, so if you've made the mistake and you've accidentally sealed that, this is the part that becomes impossible because you can't remove your paper, okay? I'm going to peel this back now as best I can and remove as much as I can manually in the first peel, because the rest I'm going to have to kind of peel it back. So the first layer of paper comes off relatively easily, okay? And while it's wet, it looks dark and it looks magical, let's say. And then as soon as it starts to dry, you can see that there are many, many, many layers to paper that doesn't look as magical. So we're going to just take off the first layer, and I'm going to have you just trust me on this one that there are many other layers of paper to go. There we go. So I'm just taking off the main pulp of the image, and at the same time, as I'm just using my palm of my hand, I'm removing that pulp. I'm ensuring that it's 100% dry. If it starts to smear, it means that the glue is reactivating. And if the glue reactivates, it means that it's not dry. So throw it back out in the sun, put it back under your hair dryer, and let it dry. And wet glue in your hand just feels exactly like that. It just feels like wet glue. So also, if your image is coming off, it means that it's not dry. And that's where the difference between inkjet and laser really makes a difference. So the laser tends to transfer and dry much quicker into the adhesive, whereas the inkjet takes a little bit longer to make sure that it's really soaked into that glue and that it's dried completely together. And the difference is just that in the laser, the ink is a toner based or an oil based, essentially laser based ink, which is not water soluble. So in the inkjet, which are cheaper, usually home based inks that we use a lot in our printers, it's water soluble. So if the glue isn't dry, you can imagine when you're doing this and it's water soluble, then the glue is water soluble, the ink is water soluble, we've just sprayed it with water, so the whole thing is going to become soluble. So now, I'm not sure if you guys can see this, but it feels, you can't see how it feels, but it feels very different to my hand. So what's happening is the paper is starting to, as the board is drying, the paper is starting to really sort of disintegrate under my fingers. And you can see that the image is getting darker and darker and clearer. And that's because I'm removing all that little pulp paper that sits on top. So up here is still a little bit wet, so I'm just going to keep removing. You want to keep removing until there's no more pulp on your palms or on your fingers. And it's almost like feeling like you have rice, like partially cooked rice under your hand or something. It's just kind of mushy and smeary, but it's just that little bit of pulp of the paper has to completely be dissolved. Now I find that I can keep doing this until there's absolutely no moisture left, and that's the best way for removing the paper. If you keep adding water, you risk damaging your image because you risk reactivating the glue. So I try not to re-wet my image very often at all. I think I've completely removed all my paper now. So I'm going to show you how much paper comes off. Right, that is quite a pile of pulp that you can see right there. So that is what comes off. And then there we are left with our image. So I'm going to hold this up so you guys can get a little bit closer view. So as you can see, it's much warmer than the coolness of a printed image. I think I have another copy of that image right here. So if I put the two together, you can see that the wood makes for a much warmer, let me try and center this so you guys can see a little better. It makes for a much warmer, more, I don't know, like, it's more integrated, right? This image than just gluing on the image. So that to me would be the difference of why we would collage versus why we would transfer. So a transfer allows whatever the background is to come through. So I'm particularly fond of image transfers directly on wood because I find that they really just You know, they're just so luminescent. They're just so vibrant. This is actually perfect now for sealing and for working in different mediums. So I'm going to show you different, but I just wanted to show you the difference between just the photocopy and transferred on wood. So the transfer allows the background to show through, whatever that background may be, and the paper just, it's nice, it's white, it's punchy, but it looks like a photograph, right? This looks like a much more finished piece of art. So in the project that is coming in the summer, we have so many exciting things with transfers to do. But this is one of your little teaser sneak peeks. And I am going to go ahead and seal my image with Liquitex Clear Gesso. I honestly wish I owned shares in this product because of how much I use of it and how much I can't tell you how great a product it is. So I still use also my my Mod Podge matte spray. It works as well. But the Liquitex Clear Gesso, I'm applying that because, I'll get to that in a quick sec. I'm applying it because if I want to move into encaustic or pastels or crayons or nothing, or just sealing it, it absolutely is a kind of a one-stop shop sealing, and it gives tooth to the image. So if you're not familiar with that term, what that means is when this dries, it's going to feel like, even though it looks a little foggy right now, but once it dries, you guys will see that it's got a great little toothy, bumpy surface, which is necessary for certain types of medium to sit inside. So if you want it to move into soft pastel, it's going to be a little toothy. It's going to have like a little sandpaper grit to it so that the chalk has a place to rest and to sit. And importantly, encaustic also needs a toothy little surface in order for it to really reside and sit well within a painting. So Liquitex Clear Gesso, I tend to buy this in bigger quantities because I use a lot of it, but you can buy small little bottles like this, and I just think it's a wonderful product. And if you do have anything matte, you could also use it instead. So the Mod Podge matte works really well. The Mod Podge Ultra Matte Spray works extremely well. But if you are going to be doing lots of transfer and lots of bridging between mixed media and encaustic, then I highly recommend the Liquitex Clear Gesso. Okay, so this is not dry yet, but as it's drying, I'm going to go ahead and start painting out some of the background. So I think I told you before, I could just leave it like this and then I could put wax on it, I could do any type of sealing, but what I wanted to do is I wanted this image to stand out a little bit more than it currently does. So the image itself, I love how, like, this is my family and they're at the top of a mountain somewhere skiing or snowboarding, and I love the image so much with the snow flying through and all that, but the background is a bit distracting for me. So I'm just going to use a little bit of white paint, and I'm starting where I don't mind getting rid of the background the most. So that's up in this negative space. I'm starting with a bit more of an opaque coat. Now I am using a chalk paint in white because I would like to put encaustic on this later. If you have acrylics or you have a clay-based paint or whatever it is you have, go ahead and use that. But the clay-based paints and the chalk-based paints make for an easier transition to encaustic wax. So what I'm doing now is I'm going around the helmets, and I'm not adding any more paint to my brush. So my brush is very depositing a thin amount. And so the reason for that is I think that it might look a little harsh if some of the background isn't visible. So if I were to just go ahead and paint it completely out in white, or in any color for that matter, I think it would just take away a little bit from, I think it would look too cartoony. Do you know what I mean? Like a little campy. So I'm going to get a finer brush so I can get in closer to that helmet. I just need a better brush. Here we go. Something a little smaller. So I'm trying not to, like I said, to get rid of the background entirely, because I think that the whole thing would then lead to a different sort of look. I just wanted to calm down the background a little bit so that my focal point becomes the people in the image. And if I were to paint them out super solidly, or paint out the background super solidly, then I think that for my purposes they're just going to be a little too yeah, maybe a little cartoon-like is probably the best term for it. So I'm just painting out this little bit. I'm having a hard time upside down seeing what part is background and what part is helmet, so I'm going to flip it for one quick sec. Bear with me. Okay. I don't know what that is, but I'm just going to adjust it a little bit. There. So can you see that the background is still visible because I didn't use such a harsh amount of paint? Okay, so the background is still visible. You can still see that they're in the trees. You can still see all that stuff. And that to me is perfect. I'm not sure that I want to go ahead and add any more, but if you feel like you wanted to add some more, that would be a great time to do it. So fine collage is also something that I really like to work with. So I'm going to show you a fun little way that I use fine collage to get some of my I don't know, I guess to embellish. You'll see in a second. We're going to do something super fun here. So I'm going to use my light box, and what I'm going to do with the light box is I'm going to show you how you would use it to use your picture. So you would have a second printout of the picture, and you put it on the light box, and then let's say I wanted to make this helmet in a different paper. I would lay the paper on top, turn on the light, trace out the image, I haven't got my light box plugged in, so I'm just showing you how it would work. So then I'd be able to cut that image out and then collage it in. Now this image, unfortunately, I printed a little bit smaller, so I'm going to do it a little bit differently. I'm going to do it directly on, which is a little more challenging, but it still can be done. There we go. So I'm going to lay this on top. You can see how if I had the light shining through, it would just make things much simpler. Where the helmet is light, it's easy. Where the helmet gets dark, it's not as easy. So fine collage is what I consider tissue papers, rice papers, pretty much just anything that has a thinner quality to it. I'm going to cut that out. So I'm trying to add a little interest to this picture, a little mixed media nature to it, without it being over the top like a full painting. I really just wanted to demonstrate transfer and the powerful nature it has on letting the background really show through. There we go. So this is where I'm going to use my spray Mod Podge, just because it's handy, it's easy, it's right there. You can also use any of your adhesives. Whoops, a daisy. It stuck to my finger more than it stuck to the board. You have to be a little more careful. This stuff is sticky. There we go. So now I'll grab a baby wipe and I'm just going to remove any excess glue. Oh, that's an interesting thing. So you can see that what I did was I accidentally took off with the baby wipe a little bit of my background. But the nice thing is it reveals some of the warmth. So I may just leave it. I'm just going to see what happens. But anyway, I can either cover that back with white, or I can take it back off, or I can put it back. But anyway, so you can see here this little bit of collage really looks cute in here. But at the same time, it needs a little bit of shading, right? Now, these two guys, if their helmets didn't have anything fun going on, what kind of a parent would I be, right? So let's get them a little bit of collage as well. This helmet is much darker, so I think I might try to maybe just paint it out. And then this one, let's see what we want to do there. So the best way to really just see what it is just hold up different bits of collage and see what you think about the color. I do like this rust paper here. Here's a little darker rust paper. I think the rust is cute. I think I'll go with the rust paper. If I don't like it, like I said, I can always change things up. I'm going to grab a pencil, trace it. So again, the light box would make my life so much easier right now. Okay. A little bit of collage. Again, this is what I consider fine collage, right? Because it's a thin little paper. And it doesn't take much to really dramatically change the effect and the look of this, and to really bring some wow, some pizzazz into the parts of the painting that are important to you. So by dulling out the background, I didn't ignore the background, but by dulling out the background, I just kind of recessed it into the back. And now I'm going to go ahead and add a bit of embellishment. This helps make the important parts more important. There we go. Baby wipe again. Baby wipes, remember, are extremely corrosive, which is why I keep removing some of my background, but I can always adjust that afterwards. And now, and now this one needs a little something, right? So let's pull out a little paint for that one, because it seems to me that it could use a bit of, what color do we think? So I think in contrast maybe to the rust paper, we should go with a type of a turquoise. So I am going to be using, there we go. I'm going to be using a, what's this one called? Muted turquoise. And I can add a little bit of white to it if I think it's going to be a bit too, yeah, there, that's nice. A bit too dark. So again, I don't want to use opaque paint. So if I use opaque paint on here, then again I'm going to be adding to that challenge that I'm already experiencing with this being a little bit campy. So I'm trying to make this painting more interesting, but at the same time I don't want it to be like a cartoon, or that I have to repaint the entire thing. So what I'm doing is I'm using acrylics that are heavily pigmented. So they're fluid acrylic. And the reason I'm using fluid acrylics is because of their translucent nature. So I've gone and added a bit of white to it, but that's okay because you'll see my baby wipe will be able to remove it in a minute. But the fluid acrylics are super heavily pigmented paints that allow the light to pass through. So if I hadn't added any white, which I'm going to, when I do my shading, you'll see that in a moment, but when I add my shading to it, you'll see that it can be completely translucent. So I'm going to hold this up close so that you guys can see that. It looks pretty opaque, but because there's a lot of pigment in here, the pigment is sort of staining the image, and all I'm doing is dabbing it super lightly over and over with the baby wipe. And what that's going to do is that's going to remove a lot of the opacity of the white paint and allow the pigmented medium, the fluid medium, fluid acrylics that have stained my surface to really show through, so that I have an instant shading, okay, because the original helmet is still showing through. So I don't have to go and highlight and shadow and shade and do all that stuff because the original helmet is still there, okay? So now let's go in and change a little bit of the background up, and just like that, we are almost done. So I am going to take a little bit of the pure turquoise and some water, and I'm just going to add it to the edge. So what that's going to do is it's just going to help it blend better into the black. So you see the black of the rest of the, a little bit down there, into the black of the rest of the picture. So I don't want it to be too pastel, otherwise there won't be any value integration between the top and the bottom of the picture. And for those of you who've been following Open Studio, you would know that that value difference is integral to the entire design, because if we're only looking at the pop color, we're only looking at the contrast between the black and the white on the top, then we're losing a lot of the integrity of the rest of the picture because we're not looking around. So the other thing that I might do is, you see that little bit of blue that I just added down there? I might actually put some over here just as a bit of an accent. So I don't want a lot. I'm just going to move it in with my finger, and then that's it. So that's just enough to move me around in here. Now this piece, as you can see, this helmet has a weird thing at the front. I think there's a visor there, and it looks very disjointed with the rest of the painting. So again, I'm going to use my fluid acrylics, and I'm going to use like a rusty brown with a little bit of that turquoise. So the reason I'm picking up a bit of turquoise, I am going to make a green out of that, but the reason I'm using a bit of that is because I want it to have a bit of a understanding and a bit of a reference to this part over here. So I'm just going to put those colors in, deposit them in, let them sit for a minute or two, and then baby wipe that off. And then I'm going to pick up the same paint, and I'm going to go in the top of the helmet. So the reason I'm doing that is just to give it a bit of volume. Okay, so let that sit for a minute. Now over here, I'm going to do something different. I could shade in the helmet, or I could shade behind the helmet. So I have two choices. I think down here, I'm going to do a little of both. I'm going to shade both behind and on top. And you notice I'm not using paint. So this is just another little tool, another little trick that we're going to be talking about over the summer projects. But I'm going to add a little bit down here too. This is a water-soluble pencil. And the water-soluble pencil, I can add a little bit here and there. And then I'm going to show you what happens when I just use a little bit of water on my brush. Maybe a little more water on my brush. But I can actually blend that out as thinly or as opaquely as I like. So I don't want this to look like an outline. So I'm using more water and I'm just spreading it a little thinner. So in our videos over the summer and throughout this entire project that's coming up, we're going to be talking a lot about image integration, because I know that that's an area that a lot of people struggle with, is how to make something not look like it's been outlined, right? Yet you want it to look like you've seamlessly integrated it into your painting. So I'm gonna grab a little more water and just pull that ink out. But what you can see is that I do have a little bit of an outline because I allowed it to be a little thicker than in some areas. But by spreading it out with water, I've thinned it out to the point where it just looks like a nice little shadow. So I'm going to take some more water and go around to some of the other areas that I do the same. Now what I want to try to avoid is making the whole thing look like an outline. So that's why I only placed a bit of that pencil in certain areas. So by doing that, I can draw your eye through, and instead of keeping the object outlined, if I were to outline the objects, what happens is I keep your eye trapped within like a fence, within a barrier. So all I'm doing here is I'm just allowing enough of a place for your eye to just sit and rest and then move on. So that's what a lot of these darker areas are for. It's just allowing our eye to move throughout the painting and not get trapped in any one spot. So if I were to leave that too dark anywhere, then that's exactly what we would end up with, is like a black hole, right? You just get sucked in, and that's the end. That's the end of you. You don't move past that spot because you've made a trap. There. Now, any place we want to increase the value is easy to do with water-soluble pencils, because all we do is add a little more pencil, add a little more water, and I can change the value. So you can see in that helmet, I can completely add that, that shading right there. Now the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up some of that white, and I'm going to go in and I'm just going to very loosely add a highlight over top of my collage. And the reason I'm doing that is just to keep, there we go, just to keep our eye moving throughout, because we've got a lot of coolness up here now with the white, but we don't have, and we have a lot of warmth with the wood. So I'm just going to go through and I'm going to start to add just little hits of white and then blend them in with my finger. Could also add in a different color if I wanted to you know, bring in a bit of different color down here. I could add a little bit of that. Baby wipe, make it nice and thin. But little hits of highlight is what we're adding here. Okay, it's not an integration thing. This is more about a highlight to keep our eye moving throughout, because the wood, as I mentioned before, adds a lot of warmth, right? And that warmth, albeit really beautiful, is also really distracting from, or not distracting, it's too much of the same, right? It's sea of same. So I'm just going to turn this so I can have a quick look. I think, so there's one helmet in the middle. I told you I was going to remove some, so I think I'm going to go do that now. I'm just turning it so I can see what I've done. Yeah, okay, so this one helmet in the middle is really orange. I'm not sure that I'm loving it, but let's try and remove some of this other color, and I might decide to tone it down. It's a little much. This is Sebastian, and Sebastian is like, looks like he's going for all the attention. So I think I'm going to just add a little bit of white over that. And then the white is actually mixing with the paint, so I'm getting this greeny color, which I'm not minding. I think it actually looks pretty good. I'm going to let it fade away to dark, and then maybe leave some of that rust paper showing, but just not all of it. It was just a little intense. There we go. So, again, if I want that darkness, I just come back in with my water-soluble pencil or your black paint, whatever it is. Gonna add a little bit there, a little water. So image integration, like I said, even in a transfer, can be a really beautiful thing, because just having the image on here looked gorgeous. Like there was nothing wrong with my image, just straight transferred onto the wood. However, you can see with the addition of a bit of color and of a bit of a place to rest your eye, I think I'm going to bring a bit more white over into here. So remember when I was telling you when I removed a bit too much of the background, you can see I'm easily able to replace that. A little dry brushing, a baby wipe, and lickety split, that is done. So you could take this and you could go as far as you want with these. Now we could let this dry. We can, oh, one thing I would do with it though is, I keep forgetting that. So when you have a water soluble pencil, or you're using chalk or soft pastels or anything like that, anything that could potentially move by brushing on a varnish or anything like that, you'll want to make sure you set that. So the one product that I tend to use a lot of is the Mod Podge matte spray. You can use any fixative spray, of course, but the matte spray is really nice because it's not going to change the sheen, and it's going to let everything stay put, so that later on when you go and put the wax over top, or if you decide to do faux wax or whatever it is you're going, however you're going to finish these pieces, your water soluble things are not going to move. You want them to stay firmly in place. So again, from here you can stamp, you can paint, you can, you can continue onto this piece for as long as you want to keep working at it, and until you're happy with it. As I mentioned before, if you work with a color image in the first place, then you can adjust colors and change colors and everything else. But keep in mind that black and white does really give you a whole new platform of possibilities. So that's why I often will just print on black and white. so that I'm able to add my own coloring and things like that. Thank you for watching and enjoy. Have fun, everybody.